In this video, I'll explain why I don't really like new builds after living in one for 3 years. I bought a new build London flat back in 2019 on a shared ownership scheme, and there's a few things that have let me down. It's really up to your personal preference and opinion on what you want, so there isn't a right or wrong answer, but let's explore some of the typical cons that I've found living in a new build development. So I've broken this up into three main sections. Firstly is comparing the quality of new builds versus old builds. Secondly is the insulation and how warm they are in the winter and the summer. And thirdly is the noise and thinness of the build quality and the walls in apartment buildings. I've also got another video that I'll link up in the top corner which talks more about my regrets around the finances and money side of buying a new build. So the first thing to mention is that there are different types of property developers. Now, there are loads of SMEs or small to medium enterprises. Now, these are the small property developers. It might be a one-man band leading a team of people, but this is where they might buy a very small plot of land, get some local builders and build some homes. And typically in this scenario, you often find a higher quality in the houses, but I'm specifically in this video talking about the big national house builders that buy all of their materials in bulk and create these huge 1,000 home plots where it's all the same and every house looks exactly the same as the next one next to it. It's in these environments where you'll start to see that the management of these big companies put loads of pressures on the actual builders themselves and the people managing the project on the ground, which means things get rushed, that it's cheap, it's quick, and therefore you have low quality. But with boring designs, cheap materials, and a quick turnaround to build a house, it means that it's incredibly profitable for these companies, and that's why they do it. Now, because there's tons of pressure in new builds and they're building them as quickly and as fast as they can, it means that the trades rush all of the jobs, which is why new build homes have more than 100 defects on average for every single homeowner. That being said, it is very natural to have defects on a new build property. They're big, they're complex, there's lots of bits to them, but natural things happen like settlement cracks. As you build on top of what is essentially mud and sand down below, things can start to sink over time with the weight of the house, and that's why you get settlement cracks. But it's not a big issue, it's quite a natural thing to happen. But all that being said, this is starting to spark a real revolution from people who just realise that sometimes the craftsmanship and the workmanship is just really, really dodgy, and actually it's starting to create a revolt of homeowners who aren't getting a good service in return from the home builders and are not fixing their problems. I had all sorts of issues in my house where I had an uncapped soil vent that was creating an awful smell in the flat. I had all of my underfloor heating, all of the loops were completely mixed up. There's dodgy plastering, there's dodgy plumbing bits as well. It's just cheap and quick and rushed. You can really, really tell. For example, this guy who's called Paul, he was in Colchester in Essex. He bought a Taylor Wimpey development and was so unhappy with the service and the level of defects that he put a massive banner on the side of his house encouraging people not to buy from that development. Another development nearby started protesting because the cladding used was not suitable, and it was very similar to the cladding used on the Grenfell incident. Recently this has got better, but for larger buildings, developers in the past few years have still been cutting some corners, meaning that certain cladding or insulation in bigger buildings and developments, maybe not houses, but on the big scale, is still questionable on its safety. In another development, the buyers found that their garage was so unstable and so incredibly unsafe that they put dangerous building signs all over the house and the garage and put a shipping container in their front garden to try and deter as many buyers as possible from buying any more homes in their development. And lastly, another estate where neighbours started vanishing slowly overnight. Because of unsafe cladding and unsafe materials used in the new build development, people were just selling up and leaving. They were sick of it. Now, living in an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, especially in the summer, can be very, very difficult because the sun beams right through the windows and really it starts to heat up the flat. But because there are restricted windows, limited ventilation, it means that you can't get the crosswinds like you would do in a house, which means flats and apartments can get very, very hot. If you just do a quick Google search, you'll see loads of people talking about how hot their flats and apartments actually get. Now, mine has reached easily over 33 to 34 degrees in the summer in the bedroom and the living room. But why are loads of people seeing their new builds overheat really, really badly? Now, you'd think the developers would notice this, but they do, and they're trying to avoid accepting the problem. What developers tend to do is when they do their heat analysis surveys as part of all of the new build program going on, they tend to choose a room that is non-south facing, has low windows, and limited sun to heat it up. And they use that as a test and apply that to the entire development, which means all of the apartments with south facing windows have been analysed and assessed based on an apartment with a north facing window, and therefore is naturally going to be cooler. Now, this is incredibly unfair because the whole development is being assessed on this one flat that has been chosen for a very specific reason, which means people like you and me who buy new builds end up in horribly overheating homes where we can't control the inflow of fresh air. Now, I've got a Dyson smart fan in my bedroom, and in the summer it reads temperatures above 33 degrees Celsius, which is incredibly stifling hot for a flat or apartment. They say that the average comfortable temperature shouldn't be any more than 25 degrees. Anything above this starts to become a health risk. Looking online, there are tons of posts in forums all over the UK where people are complaining about this particular problem because new builders are cutting corners and really designing bad layouts of flats so that you can't get ventilation from one end to the other like you can do in a house. And thirdly is noise problems. Now, if you buy a house in the UK, you probably won't have this problem as much unless you live near a main road, which I do, but I've got noise coming from a really busy main road in London where it comes straight through the walls and the windows, but also having lived in different apartments, some that are older than this one in London, I've never had a problem with sound before, but after moving into a new build, I can hear every footstep, every bit of music, every TV that's played. You can hear your neighbours do absolutely anything around you, which makes me really question, because when they build these buildings, it's just thin bits of concrete, and often is the case, instead of putting acoustic insulation in between the walls, and even little things like acoustic boards as well, and making sure that it's all sound and airtight, they just do a really cheap, quick job of it, and you have a concrete slab, possibly a little bit of insulation, and then the plasterboard, meaning there's no real acoustic protection between one flat to the next. Another weird flaw is that on a lot of new builds, the balconies for high-rise apartments and flats, they tend to be built off-site, and it's almost like a bit of a Lego set. So they have two huge metal prongs on the balconies, and they slot it into the building and lock it on. But it means that I live next to a family who have a small child, and when their child runs up and down their balcony, the vibrations from jumping up and down and running on the balcony go through those huge metal prongs into the brickwork, which then completely vibrates the entire building, which causes such a noise. And this is really down to poor design. So for me in the future, I definitely won't be buying a new build anytime soon. I think there are some great pros to it, but also there are loads and loads of cons. And for me, I see way more value in buying an old house, doing it up, getting the tax-free gains, but also being part of this renovation project where you can bring life back into a characterful property. Because I see so many developments that look completely sterile and lifeless from new builds, and I think it's good sometimes just to have a little bit of character and history in a property. If you enjoyed this video, then definitely check out this one here, which is my regrets of buying a new build, which goes way more into the finances, figures, and money behind new builds versus old build homes. So I think you will find this really useful, so definitely check it out. So feel free to choose this, and I'll see you in the next video.